Back in the 1960s, a black mother could stretch a dollar so far it didn't know where it started. She fed a whole table of hungry children on nothing but flour, some lard, and whatever the garden gave her that week. Her kitchen smelled like cast iron and cornbread before the streetlights came on, and what she pulled off that stove is something her children never stopped talking about. Number 42 on this list turns one can of sardines into a full family dinner, and number 17 costs almost nothing, but kids would line up twice for a second helping. These weren't recipes from a cookbook. These were survival meals from the cheapest cuts and the plainest pantry staples, and they tasted so good that children begged for them long after the lean years were over. So hit subscribe and pull up a chair, because here are 60 cheap dishes black mothers made that 1960s kids begged for.
Red beans and rice was the heartbeat of Sunday kitchens. A pot bubbling slow on the stove all afternoon, while laughter, church clothes, and gospel music filled the background. It came from New Orleans, but lived in every black household that knew how to stretch one meal into three. Mothers started with dried beans, soaked overnight and flavored with what little meat was left from the week. A ham bone, a sausage piece, or maybe just a pinch of seasoning salt. The smell alone could feed the soul. When poured over rice, it became something rich, creamy, and comforting, every bite carrying the weight of history and home. Kids begged for seconds because it never tasted the same twice. Each pot had its own rhythm, its own story. Red beans and rice didn't just fill bellies. It reminded families that food could bring joy even in lean times. It was a dish that spoke the language of patience, pride, and peace after a long week.
Number 20, sweet potato pancakes with sorghum. Leftover sweet potatoes from Sunday dinner almost always ended up on Tuesday's griddle, smashed into pancakes thick with sorghum syrup. The potatoes from Sunday got mashed cold with a fork, then mixed with a half cup of flour, 1 egg, and just enough buttermilk to loosen the batter. A small ladle poured the mix onto a hot, greased griddle, and the cakes came up orange-brown with crisp, lacy edges. The sorghum bottle sat on the table because it cost less than maple syrup and held more flavor in one spoon. Black families across the South kept a jug of sorghum on the shelf year-round, since 1 gallon could last from October planting to April plowing. The pancakes filled up a child fast, used food that would have gone bad by Wednesday, and tasted like dessert in the middle of a hard week. Neck bones and brown gravy turned the cheapest cut at the butcher counter into something children requested by name when asked what they wanted for Christmas dinner. These bony cuts with their small pockets of rich, dark meat required hours of slow cooking to release their magic, but the result was worth every minute of patient waiting. Black mothers would season the bones heavily with salt, pepper, garlic, and onion powder before browning them in cast iron skillets until deeply caramelized. Covered with water and simmered low and slow, the bones released collagen that thickened the cooking liquid into silky gravy without any flour needed. By the time they were done, the meat slid off the bones with the gentlest touch, tender and infused with deep porky flavor. Children would pick up the bones with their fingers, gnawing every last bit of meat and sucking the marrow from the centers. Cornbread crumbled into a tall glass of cold buttermilk separated insiders from everybody else. If you knew, no explanation was needed. If you didn't, none would be enough. The cornbread had to be day-old, fresh, dissolved into mush instead of holding as crumble. You broke it into chunks, dropped them into the glass, poured cold buttermilk over the top, and ate it with a long spoon, chasing soaked pieces to the bottom. The tang of buttermilk against the grit of cornmeal was savory, sour, and oddly refreshing in the deep South heat. Some added a pinch of salt, others crumbled raw onion into the glass, which sounds wrong until you've tried it. Through the 1940s and 60s, This was an after-work snack for laborers and a between meals holdover for kids who couldn't wait for supper. It used yesterday's bread, needed no cooking, and the buttermilk was already in the icebox from that morning. And then there were the desserts that carried something heavier than sugar. Navy bean pie came out of the Nation of Islam in the 1930s and reached full stride by the 60s, when Elijah Muhammad's How to Eat to Live told followers to reject the foods of slavery, sweet potatoes, collards, pork, and build a new diet from navy beans, whole wheat, and discipline. The pie was custard style, made from cooked and mashed navy beans, blended smooth with eggs, sugar, butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, then poured into a crust and baked until it set like its sweet potato cousin. The men who sold it wore dark suits and bow ties, standing on city corners beside stacks of the Final Call newspaper, offering slices wrapped in wax paper. The taste was milder than sweet potato pie, less earthy, almost like a spiced vanilla custard. And most people couldn't identify the main ingredient unless you told them. Bean pie was an act of reinvention. Like the X that replaced a surname, it said, "We choose what feeds us now." Butter rice with fried eggs was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on what the family needed and what the pantry held. Mothers would cook rice until fluffy, then stir in generous amounts of butter until each grain glistened and carried that rich, creamy flavor. A fried egg was placed. On top is runny yolk breaking open to create a natural sauce that children mixed eagerly into the rice below. Some mothers added a splash of soy sauce or a sprinkle of black pepper for extra depth. This dish was the answer when money was tight but bellies needed filling, providing protein and carbohydrates in one inexpensive bowl. Children loved the ritual of breaking the yolk themselves, watching it flow golden across the butter-slicked grains. It was honest, humble food that required no pretense but delivered complete satisfaction. Black-eyed pea soup carried cultural significance that went beyond its delicious taste and affordable price. Black mothers simmered dried peas with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the peas were creamy and the broth rich with smoky flavor. This soup was especially important on New Year's Day, when black-eyed peas symbolized luck and prosperity for the coming year. Children grew up understanding this soup connected them to traditions stretching back generations. The peas provided protein while the broth delivered comfort, creating a complete meal that cost almost nothing to prepare. Mothers cooked large batches that lasted several days, with each reheating bringing new depth. This soup taught children that food carried history and hope, not just nutrition. It was heritage served in a bowl.
Baked macaroni and cheese with evaporated milk was the rich, creamy holiday version that families saved for Christmas because it took more ingredients, more time, and more love than the everyday stovetop version. Mothers boiled the macaroni until it was tender, then mixed it with shredded cheese, butter, eggs, and evaporated milk that gave the dish its signature richness. When it baked in the oven, the top browned just enough to form a crispy layer children fought over, while the inside stayed soft, cheesy, and comforting. The smell alone made the table feel festive, a deep, savory aroma that told everyone Christmas dinner was almost ready. Children scooped big spoonfuls onto their plates, watching the cheese stretch in long, soft strands that made the dish feel luxurious even when budgets were tight. This was a dish built from care, the kind of food mothers made because they knew the holiday needed something special, even if they had to stretch ingredients to make it happen. Every family had their own version, but every version made children close their eyes and smile at the first bite. Macaroni and cheese with evaporated milk tasted like celebration, tradition, and a holiday table made complete.
Molasses stack cake appeared at 1960s Black Christmas gatherings as towering testament to community cooperation, each thin layer contributed by different family members or neighbors who brought their portion to assemble. The layers were more like dense cookies, made with molasses, flour, and spices that created sturdy foundations for the apple filling spread between. Dried apples were stewed with molasses and cinnamon until they became thick paste that held layers together and softened them over days of aging. The assembled cake stood 6 to 12 layers high, wrapped in cloth, and stored where the flavors melded into something greater than individual parts. Making stack cake was a community event. Women gathered in kitchens, each contributing her signature layer while catching up on holiday news. Children watched and learned that some traditions require cooperation rather than individual achievement. By Christmas morning, the cake had transformed into a cohesive whole that tasted like concentrated holiday spirit.
Pecan pie was the Southern reunion classic that tasted like sweetness, crunch, and memory baked into a golden brown slice that reflected the trees and fields many families grew up around. Grandmothers gathered pecans from the yard or accepted bags from neighbors who shared what their own trees had dropped, washing and sorting the nuts before stirring them into the glossy filling of sugar, eggs, butter, and syrup that came together like a thick, shining caramel. As the pie baked, the top formed a crackled layer of toasted pecans, while the inside stayed soft, sweet, and gooey, creating the perfect contrast when cut into warm slices. Served at reunions, pecan pie reminded everyone of fall harvests, winter holidays, and afternoons spent cracking shells on front porches while stories filled the air. It was rich but never overwhelming, and even a thin slice felt decadent and comforting. Families carried it to gatherings wrapped in foil or cloth and placed it proudly among the other desserts, knowing it would vanish quickly once plates were passed. Pecan pie carried history, flavor, and the strength of generations who knew how to make something precious from simple ingredients.
Stuffed pork chops were the special occasion version of everyday dinners, reserved for birthdays, holidays, or when company came calling. Thick-cut chops were sliced horizontally to create pockets, which mothers filled with seasoned breadcrumbs, celery, onions, and sage. The stuffed chops were browned in skillets, then transferred to ovens until filling cooked through and meat was tender. The presentation was impressive, each chop appearing twice as large thanks to stuffing bulging from within. Children felt special eating food that looked like it belonged in restaurants rather than home kitchens. The stuffing absorbed juices from pork as it cooked, becoming moist and flavorful while adding texture contrast. This dish proved budget cooking could still feel elegant and celebratory when prepared with care and creativity. Pickled pig's feet sat in gallon jars on counters where smoke hung heavy and laughter echoed off wooden walls. These gelatinous, vinegar-soaked pieces of pork were pulled from brine with tongs and served on wax paper with saltine crackers. The meat was tender from hours of simmering before pickling, falling easily from small bones that required patience to navigate. The vinegar brine cut through the richness of the fat, creating flavor that was sour, salty, and deeply porky all at once. Pig's feet cost almost nothing since butchers considered them throwaway cuts. For African Americans who transformed every part of the hog into something delicious, pickled feet represented both economy and culinary tradition passed down through generations of resourceful cooks who wasted nothing. Baked pork chops with rice was the weeknight miracle that freed mothers from standing over hot stoves while still delivering meals that tasted like hours of effort. Seasoned pork chops were laid over uncooked rice in a baking dish, then covered with cream of mushroom soup diluted with water. As the dish baked, the rice absorbed all the liquid and flavors from the meat, becoming tender and savory. The chops cooked to perfection on top, edges caramelized where they met the bubbling sauce. This one-dish meal meant fewer pots to wash and more time for helping with homework or other household tasks. Children loved the creamy rice that clung to the chops, and fathers appreciated coming home to hot meals requiring nothing more than setting the table. Efficiency and comfort married together in a single casserole.
Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the dessert that always arrived in the biggest glass dish the one carried with two hands because it was filled to the top with layers of comfort history and family pride. Grandmothers lined the bottom with vanilla wafers and then poured warm homemade custard over them, letting the cookies soften slowly until they became part of the pudding itself. Tender, sweet, and soaked with flavor. Sliced bananas were tucked between the layers in soft, pale rounds, adding freshness that lifted the sweetness and made the dish feel alive. More custard came next, then more wafers, and then another layer again until the dish was nearly overflowing. Some finished it with whipped topping, while others insisted on meringue browned in the oven until the peaks turned golden. When the dish hit the reunion table, spoons clattered against bowls and children rushed forward because everyone knew banana pudding disappeared fast. It tasted like childhood afternoons, like front porches, like kitchens filled with steam and voices talking over one another while dessert chilled in the refrigerator. Banana pudding was beloved not because it was fancy, but because every family made it slightly differently and each version carried its own memories. It was the dessert that united generations one scoop at a time. There was magic in a pot of pinto beans with fatback. The beans started hard and pale, but after hours of simmering, they turned soft, smoky, and full of flavor. That piece of fatback, salty, greasy, and rich, was the key. It turned plain beans into something families looked forward to all week. Mothers knew just how long to let it cook, letting the smell drift through the house, making everyone hungry before dinner even started. Served with rice or cornbread, it filled bellies without emptying pockets. It was the kind of meal that reminded everyone that slow food was soul food. Pinto beans weren't about luxury. They were about making do and making it delicious. When you sat down to that bowl, you didn't just taste beans. You tasted strength, creativity, and the rhythm of home.
Number 21, salt pork gravy, overday old biscuits. No biscuit was ever thrown out in a black household in 1960 because a tough biscuit became the foundation for the cheapest gravy on the planet. 2 small cubes of salt pork rendered in a skillet until the bottom was coated in golden fat. A heaping spoon of flour stirred into the grease-brown slow, and then a cup of evaporated milk thinned with water got whisked in until the gravy was thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The yesterday biscuits, hard and a little stale, got split open and laid in the bowl, and the gravy poured over them softened them right back to fresh. Working families in Memphis and Birmingham ate this twice a week through the winter months. It used what was already in the kitchen. It cost about a dime in ingredients, and it sat heavy enough to last a full morning of work. The plate went out the door warm, and the bowl came back empty by the second swallow. Ham bone soup stretched Christmas dinner into days of nourishment, turning what others might discard into liquid gold that fed entire families. After the holiday ham was carved and served, black mothers saved that precious bone with its clinging meat and rich marrow, knowing it held another full meal waiting to be released. The bone would simmer for hours in large pots with dried beans, onions, celery, and whatever vegetables the pantry offered: carrots, potatoes, turnips, or cabbage. Children loved watching the transformation as clear water became rich, cloudy broth that smelled of smoke and salt and comfort. By the second day of simmering, the meat fell from the bone in tender shreds, while the beans softened into creamy bites. This soup cost virtually nothing beyond the original ham purchase, yet it could feed a family of 8 for 3 days running. Served with cornbread for dipping, it became a holiday tradition in its own right, reminding everyone that nothing in a black kitchen ever went to waste. Crackling bread was born on hog killing day when families rendered lard from pork fat, and the crispy bits left behind, cracklings, were folded straight into cornbread batter. The cracklings gave the bread a crunch plain cornbread never had, little pockets of salt and pork fat that burst between your teeth. This wasn't something learned from a book. You stood next to whoever worked the stove, watching her crumble the cracklings with her fingers, judging the batter's thickness by sight. Through the 1940s and 50s in the rural South, hog killing meant every part of the animal fed somebody, and crackling bread was how the smallest scraps ended up on the table tasting richer than anything store-bought. Kids tore off corners still warm from the cast iron, eating it plain or crumbled into pot liquor. The bread kept for days, growing denser with each one. But before box mixers took over the counter, some of the best cakes came from bottles. Coca-Cola cake was pure 1960s alchemy, a chocolate cake with actual Coca-Cola in the batter and the frosting, plus a handful of miniature marshmallows melted into the icing until it turned glossy and thick. The soda added moisture and a faint caramel tang that plain water or milk never could. You creamed butter and sugar, sifted cocoa and flour, then poured in the warm Coke and watched it fizz through the batter. The frosting was its own event: butter, cocoa, and more. Coca-Cola heated together, then poured over powdered sugar until it ran smooth. Chopped pecans went on top while the icing was still wet. The whole thing set up fudgy and dark, almost too rich, but never quite, and it traveled well, which mattered because this was the cake you carried to the church supper in a 9x13 pan covered with foil and a folded dish towel on top to keep it warm. Salmon croquettes over rice was Friday supper in countless black households, a tradition born from Catholic neighbors and adopted for its economy. Canned salmon was mashed with eggs, onions, and crushed crackers, then formed into patties and fried until golden and crispy. These croquettes were placed atop mounds of fluffy white rice, their juices soaking into the grains below. Mothers stretched a single can of salmon into enough patties to feed an entire family, making it one of the most affordable protein sources available. Children loved the crispy exterior, giving way to tender, flavorful fish, especially when hot sauce was passed around the table. The dish connected families to coastal foodways and the resourcefulness of making canned goods. Feel homemade? This was frugal cooking that never tasted cheap. Cabbage soup stretched a single head into a meal that could feed an entire family with plenty left over. Black mothers sliced cabbage thin and simmered it with smoked meat, tomatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings were available. The cabbage softened into sweet, tender ribbons that absorbed the smoky broth beautifully. This soup was economical beyond measure since cabbage was always affordable, even during the toughest times. Children who claimed to dislike vegetables would eat bowl after bowl, won over by the rich flavor that masked any bitterness. The soup improved overnight as flavors deepened and melded together, making leftovers even more prized than the first serving. Mothers knew that cabbage soup represented survival cooking at its finest, turning pennies into pounds of nourishment.
Collard greens with smoked turkey tails were the Christmas pot that simmered for hours, filling the entire house with a smell so familiar and comforting that children knew exactly what day it was before anyone said a word. Mothers washed the greens leaf by leaf, removing stems and tearing them into pieces so tender they practically melted after cooking. The smoked turkey tails went into the pot first, releasing their flavor slowly into the broth until the kitchen filled with that unmistakable smoky scent. When the greens finally joined, they simmered until silky and rich, soaking up every bit of seasoning. Children dipped bread into the pot liquor when mothers were not looking, because the broth tasted just as good as the greens. This dish felt like home, history, and holiday all at once. No matter how tight the budget was, collard greens with smoked turkey tails made the table feel whole, reminding families that Christmas was about flavor, family, and tradition shared across generations. Collard greens tasted like warmth, love, and the comfort of knowing good food would always bring people together.
Red velvet cake in the 1960s bore little resemblance to the bright crimson versions sold today. It was subtler, more sophisticated, and made with buttermilk that gave it genuine tang. African American mothers achieved the distinctive color through a chemical reaction between cocoa, buttermilk, and vinegar, creating a mahogany hue that deepened as it baked. The cream cheese frosting hadn't yet become standard. Instead, mothers made cooked flour frosting, called ermine frosting, that was silky, not too sweet, and required patience to perfect. Beating the mixture until peaks formed took arm strength that modern stand mixers cannot replicate. The cake appeared at Christmas dinners in gleaming cake stands, its color suggesting festivity without artificial dyes. Children knew that red velvet meant celebration, that its appearance on the table signaled a special occasion worth remembering. The recipe traveled through church cookbooks and handwritten cards, each family adding small variations that made their version unique and deeply personal.
Peach cobbler was the bubbling reunion dessert that pulled people toward the kitchen long before the pan ever hit the table, filling the air with the smell of peaches, sugar, and warm spices. Whether made from fresh peaches in the summer or canned peaches during the rest of the year, the filling cooked down into a thick, golden mixture that tasted like sunshine and memory. The crust varied from family to family, sometimes a lattice, sometimes a full sheet of dough, sometimes spooned on like dumplings, but always baked until brown, crisp, and irresistible. When the cobbler came out of the oven, the juices bubbled around the edges, and the scent wrapped itself around the entire gathering, making people line up with bowls in hand. Served warm with melting ice cream, or on its own, it tasted like the heart of Southern Sundays and long afternoons, spent talking, laughing, and passing plates across crowded tables. Peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was a tradition carried proudly by the cooks who prepared it year after year.
Pork chops with lima beans was a combination that made perfect sense to mothers stretching budgets during the 1960s. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight and simmered with ham hocks to build flavorful bases. Browned pork chops were added during the final hour, finishing in bean liquid while contributing their own fat and flavor. The lima beans turned creamy and rich, their texture almost velvety against the firm bite of pork. This was a complete meal in a single pot, providing protein from both beans and meat, making it nutritious as well as economical. Children who claimed to hate lima beans ate them eagerly when they tasted like pork and smelled like Sunday dinner. The dish represented the ingenuity of making ingredients work together to elevate both beyond what either could achieve alone. Fried catfish sandwiches turned river fish into roadhouse gold at juke joints near waterways throughout the South. Fresh fillets were soaked in buttermilk to remove any muddy taste, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal spiked with cayenne and black pepper. Dropped into cast iron skillets filled with hot lard, the fish emerged golden and crunchy while the flesh stayed moist and flaky inside. Served on white bread with hot sauce and tartar sauce, these sandwiches delivered the protein that kept working people going through long nights. Catfish was abundant in southern rivers and cheap at local fish markets. The smell of frying fish competed with blues guitar and the slap of dominoes on wooden tables. For a quarter, customers could fill their stomachs and still have money left for beer.
Hot water cornbread was the taste of love born from simplicity. There was nothing fancy about it, just cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and boiling water stirred until thick enough to pat into little cakes. But when those golden rounds hit hot oil in the skillet, they transformed into something unforgettable. The edges crisped, the center stayed soft, and the sound of frying filled the air like a hymn. Black mothers made it by instinct, no measuring cups, just memory and rhythm passed down from the generations before them. It was the perfect side for beans, greens, or anything with gravy. Kids loved grabbing one straight from the pan, too hot to hold but too good to wait for. It crackled when bitten, leaving that warm, toasty flavor that only cast iron can give. In those kitchens, hot water cornbread meant more than food. It was family survival turned into comfort. It stretched meals when flour was scarce, but somehow always tasted like abundance. For families with little, it was proof that little was enough.
Number 22, sunrise skillet grits with pan drippings. The Sunrise Kitchen in a 1960s soul food household ran on one rhythm, and grits with pan drippings was its first sound. Water went into the heavy pot before anyone else was awake. Once it rolled, a slow handful of stone, ground white grits got stirred in with a long wooden spoon, and the pot sat at the back of the stove for almost an hour. Right before plating, a tablespoon of bacon drippings from the coffee can on the counter went straight into the bowl. That spoonful turned a plain breakfast into something that tasted like the meat from the night before, without costing 1 extra cent. The bowl came to the table with the rim of the spoon already buried, and most people did not look up until the bowl was clean. That spoonful of saved drippings is what we still call the soul of soul food, one quiet ingredient carrying the memory of every meal that came before it. Cornbread dressing with giblets was the dish that separated holiday tables from everyday suppers, a creation so beloved that arguments over recipes could split families. Unlike boxed stuffing mixes, this dressing started with day-old cornbread crumbled by hand into large mixing bowls. Black mothers would simmer turkey giblets, the heart, liver, and gizzard, until tender, then chop them fine and fold them into the cornbread along with sauteed onions, celery, and sage. The mixture was moistened with rich broth from the giblets, bound with eggs, and baked until the top turned golden brown while the inside stayed moist. Children who claimed to hate liver would devour this dressing without knowing what made it so rich and savory. The dish cost pennies since it used parts others discarded and transformed stale bread into something magnificent. Every grandmother had her own secret variation, and children grew up measuring all other dressings against the one they remembered from childhood holiday tables. Popcorn balls held together with dark molasses were a project that turned an ordinary evening into something worth keeping. Corn was popped on the stove in a heavy pot, shaken hard until it slowed, dumped into the biggest bowl in the house. Molasses, often sorghum-based in the deep South, where families pressed their own from tall cane stalks, melted with butter until it coated a spoon without sliding off. You had to work fast once it hit the popcorn, stirring and shaping balls with oiled hands before the syrup cooled and hardened. Kids stood around waiting for their turn, fingers sticky and shining. These showed up at Halloween when store-bought candy was beyond the budget, at church harvest festivals, and on cold nights when the house needed something sweet that cost almost nothing. The molasses gave them a smoky sweetness white sugar couldn't match. But what stayed in memory wasn't the taste. It was standing at that table together, laughing, hands greased and moving. Sweet potato pone was the dessert that came before sweet potato pie, and the people who remembered it never let you forget the difference. The word pone came from the Algonquin apon, meaning baked, and Gullah Geechee, Native American and Caribbean kitchens all had their own versions. There was no crust, just grated or mashed sweet potato mixed with molasses, eggs, spices, and a little milk poured into a greased baking dish and baked until the edges caramelized and the center set into something between pudding and cake. It was denser than pie, earthier, with a chew that crust couldn't give you. In the 1940s and 50s, when flour for pie crust was an expense some households couldn't justify, pone was the answer. It used what grew in the yard and sweetened it with what was already in the pantry. The women who made it grated the raw sweet potatoes by hand on box graters, their knuckles raw by the time the dish went into the oven. Rice pudding for breakfast was a sweet morning treat that turned last night's leftover rice into something children woke up excited to eat. Mothers would warm the rice in a pot with milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vanilla until it became creamy and fragrant. Some added raisins or a pat of butter, stirring until everything melted together into comfort. The pudding was served warm in bowls, sometimes with an extra drizzle of condensed milk for families who could afford the luxury. Children loved that something as ordinary as leftover rice could be transformed into dessert they were allowed to eat before school. This dish embodied the African American philosophy of wasting nothing and finding joy in reinvention. It was practical magic, turning yesterday's side dish into today's beloved breakfast.
Candied yams cooked in brown sugar were the dish children ran to first, the sweet side that tasted like warm caramel and childhood joy. Mothers sliced the yams thick and simmered them with butter, sugar, and cinnamon until the syrup turned deep and sticky, coating each piece like glossy amber. The smell drifted through the house like a promise of the holiday to come, wrapping everything in warmth. Every bite was tender, sweet, and rich enough to feel like dessert before dessert, the flavor sinking into the soft flesh of the yams. Children often tried to sneak a piece straight from the pan, burning their tongues but smiling anyway. This dish tasted like Christmas comfort, tradition, and sweetness, wrapped in the memory of families who made magic from simple ingredients.
Pralines connected 1960s Black Christmas tables to deep Louisiana roots, those creamy pecan candies that shattered into sweetness with every bite. African American mothers in New Orleans and throughout the Gulf Coast made pralines using recipes passed through generations from Creole grandmothers who had adapted French traditions with brown sugar and native pecans. The candy required precise temperature control, cooking the sugar mixture to exactly the right stage before beating until it turned from glossy to matte. Pour too early and the pralines stayed sticky forever. Wait too long and they turned grainy and hard. Children learned to recognize the ready moment by the way mixture sheeted off the spoon, knowledge transferred through watching rather than reading. Pralines were packed into decorative boxes for Christmas gifts, each piece representing skill that store-bought candy could never match. The creamy texture against toasted pecans created flavor combinations that defined Gulf Coast Christmas celebrations.
Coconut cake was the tall, white winter bright dessert covered in soft flakes that clung to the frosting like new fallen snow, making it one of the most beautiful desserts on any reunion table. The cake layers baked into soft, tender rounds that held moisture well, especially when brushed lightly with sweet coconut milk or simple syrup to deepen the flavor. The frosting was smooth and fluffy, often made from cooked icing or whipped cream cheese depending on the family recipe, and once spread across the cake, it formed the perfect base for the final snowy coating. Handfuls of coconut were pressed gently against the sides, falling lightly across the top until the cake looked like something crafted for celebration. Its flavor was light, sweet, and refreshing, offering a cool softness that balanced the heavier, richer desserts around it. Coconut cake tasted like reunions. Church gatherings and holidays rolled into one dessert as children reached for it. First drawn to the snowy look while adults reached for it last, wanting to savor the gentle sweetness.
Fried pork chops with sawmill gravy was breakfast royalty in Black Southern households. Thin-cut chops were seasoned heavily with salt and pepper, dredged in flour, and fried until the coating turned crispy. The treasure came from what remained in the pan afterward. Mothers added flour to hot drippings, stirring until it browned slightly and smelled of toasted nuttiness. Milk was poured in slowly, whisked until it transformed into thick, peppery gravy. This gravy was ladled over chops and split biscuits, creating plates so rich that children cleaned every crumb. The combination of crispy pork, creamy gravy, and tender biscuits sustained workers through long mornings and gave children energy for school. It cost almost nothing, but delivered pure luxury that made ordinary mornings feel like celebrations. Hot sausage sandwiches were the lifeblood of juke joint menus across the Delta and Deep South. Thick links of spicy pork sausage were grilled until the casing snapped and the fat rendered into crispy edges that sizzled on flat-top griddles. The sausages were split and pressed between slices of soft white bread, dressed with yellow mustard and sometimes pickles or onions. The heat from cayenne and black pepper cut through the richness of the pork, leaving mouths burning and customers reaching for cold drinks. These sandwiches cost pennies to make, but delivered bold flavor that matched the intensity of the blues playing on the jukebox. Workers coming off shifts could afford them on wages that barely stretched. The simplicity was the point, letting the spice and smoke speak for themselves.
Macaroni and cheese with evaporated milk was the crown jewel of comfort food. It was creamy, baked golden brown on top, and made with ingredients that every family could afford: macaroni, cheese, butter, and a can of evaporated milk. That milk was the secret weapon, turning basic noodles into something silky and rich. Mothers would mix it up by hand, sprinkle breadcrumbs or shredded cheese on top, and bake it until the house smelled like heaven. On Sunday tables, it stood proud next to fried chicken and collard greens, and you could always count on kids scraping the sides of the pan for the crispy bits. It wasn't fancy cheese or fancy cookware. It was heart and patience that made it special. Every forkful carried the taste of warmth and love, something only homemade food can give. For a generation that grew up with little, this dish was proof that care could make any meal extraordinary.
Number 24, one slab of fatback, 7 mornings. A single piece of fatback could feed a whole household for a week, and grandmothers in Mississippi and Alabama knew exactly how to make it last. They would buy one thick slab on Saturday for around 20 cents a pound, then score it across the top with a paring knife so the salt would render down slow. Monday morning, 2 slices went into the cold skillet. Those slices crisped up and gave back nearly a cup of clear, golden grease that flavored everything else that hit the pan that week. The skillet never got washed. The leftover grease became the cooking fat for Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's grits, Thursday's potatoes, and Friday's hoe cakes. By Sunday, the original slab was almost gone, but the flavor had touched every plate that came through the kitchen. One pig and a careful hand could carry a family from one paycheck to the next, and almost no one threw away the brown bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. Candied yams with brown sugar glaze were the dish that made children hover near the kitchen door, waiting for that first sticky spoonful straight from the pan. Black mothers across the South would peel sweet potatoes by the dozen, slicing them into thick rounds before layering them in baking dishes passed down through generations. The magic happened when brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and vanilla were melted together and poured over the potatoes before slow baking until the edges caramelized into chewy perfection. The smell alone could pull children from their beds on holiday mornings, sweet, warm, and promising something special. In the 1960s, sweet potatoes cost almost nothing, often pulled from family gardens or bought for pennies at roadside stands. Yet when transformed by patient hands and simple pantry staples, they became the centerpiece of holiday tables that made children feel wealthy. Kids would scrape every bit of syrup from their plates, and the corner pieces with extra caramelization were fought over with passion. Frozen Kool-Aid cups turned a 5-cent packet of drink mix into a summer business that kept entire blocks buzzing. Every neighborhood had a house where somebody's mama filled Dixie cups with Kool-Aid, stuck in popsicle sticks, and sold them off the porch for a dime. Cherry was the best seller, grape ran second, tropical punch was for the bold. You mixed it stronger than the packet said, doubled the sugar, poured slow so the stick stayed centered while the cups froze overnight. By noon, kids lined up on the sidewalk with coins earned sweeping porches or returning bottles. The trick was peeling the cup without breaking the ice. Squeeze just right, let the edges give, pull the paper down in one strip. Some bit straight through, others licked slow, letting the color stain their lips purple for hours. It was a childhood economy built on sugar, ice, and 5-cent packets, and every kid on the block knew exactly which house had the coldest cups. Before lunch, money was a guarantee. Homemade fudge was the dessert that taught you patience or punished you for not having any. Cocoa, sugar, butter, milk, and vanilla went into a heavy pot and cooked over medium heat, stirred constantly until the mixture hit softball stage on the candy thermometer. Then you beat it with a wooden spoon until it thickened, lost its shine, and started to hold its shape. That beating was the whole battle. Too little and the fudge stayed glossy and never set. Too much and it turned grainy, crumbling when you tried to cut squares. Every mother had a version. Some used evaporated milk, others added marshmallow cream for insurance, and a few poured in peanut butter at the end for a streak of salt. Christmas was fudge season. It went into tins lined with wax paper and sat on the counter next to the brittle and the divinity. When a batch failed, it became fudge sauce, poured warm over ice cream without apology. Nothing wasted, not even the mistakes. Rice and gravy was the ultimate weeknight rescue, a dish that turned leftover pan drippings into liquid gold poured over fluffy white rice. Black mothers knew nothing should be wasted after frying pork chops or chicken, so they added flour to the pan and stirred until browned. Milk or water was whisked in slowly, creating thick, savory gravy that bubbled while the rice steamed nearby. The combination was simple but satisfying, offering protein-rich flavor without requiring another piece of meat. Children loved how the gravy soaked into each grain, turning plain rice into something rich and comforting. This dish represented the resourcefulness of African American kitchens, where flavor was built from what others might discard. It was frugal cooking at its finest, proving that ingenuity mattered more than expensive ingredients. Tomato, rice soup was a kitchen staple that Black mothers assembled from pantry basics when cupboards seemed bare. Canned or fresh garden tomatoes were simmered with rice, onions, and seasonings into a hearty soup that satisfied without breaking the budget. The rice absorbed the tangy tomato flavor as it cooked, creating a thick and filling bowl that children requested again and again. Some mothers added bacon drippings for richness, while others kept it simple with salt, pepper, and a touch of sugar to balance the acidity. This soup was especially beloved during winter months when a hot bowl could warm both body and spirit. Children often ate seconds without complaint, proving that tomato rice soup had a magic that fancy recipes could never match. It was comfort distilled into its purest form.
Cornbread dressing with giblets was the heart of the Christmas table, a dish that required time, patience, and the kind of cooking skill mothers carried without ever needing a recipe book. The cornbread was baked the day before, then crumbled by hand until it formed the perfect base. Giblets were boiled and chopped finely, added for richness and tradition. Mothers mixed everything with onions, celery, broth, and spices until the dressing reached a consistency somewhere between soft and firm. When it baked, the top browned beautifully while the inside stayed moist and savory. Children always asked for extra scoops because no holiday plate felt complete without it. Cornbread dressing tasted like history, effort, and the deep comfort of a dish made entirely from scratch.
Lane cake carried Alabama heritage into 1960s Black Christmas celebrations, a white layer cake filled with bourbon-soaked raisins, pecans, and coconut that made adults smile knowingly while children enjoyed the sweetness. The filling was cooked slowly, eggs and sugar combined with butter until thick, then studded with dried fruits and nuts plumped in whiskey overnight. Some mothers used homemade fruit wine when bourbon was unavailable, achieving similar depth with whatever spirits the household kept. The cake layers themselves were tender and pale, made with egg whites only, providing neutral canvas for the rich filling. Lane cake was considered fancy enough for company, but affordable enough for families who saved throughout the year for Christmas splurges. The bourbon flavor mellowed as the cake aged, making it better on Christmas Day than when first assembled. Mothers who made exceptional Lane cake earned reputations that followed them through decades of church gatherings and family reunions. Pork chops and cabbage proved Black mothers could make a dollar stretch further than anyone thought possible. Thick-cut chops were browned until they developed deep golden crust, then nestled into beds of sliced cabbage, onions, and carrots, seasoned with salt and smoked paprika. Everything simmered together in covered pots, the cabbage softening and sweetening as it absorbed rendered pork fat. The result was tender vegetables that tasted almost buttery despite having little added fat, surrounding chops that remained juicy from slow cooking. A head of cabbage cost nearly nothing and could feed an army when paired with meat. This dish appeared on tables throughout the week, reheated and somehow tasting even better as flavors continued developing overnight. It was poverty transformed into abundance through skill and patience. Neck bones and rice-filled plates at juke joints where the music played late and budgets ran thin. These bony cuts from pigs were simmered for hours in seasoned water until the meat fell away and the collagen melted into silky gravy, served over mounds of white rice that soaked up every drop of rich, porky broth. This dish stretched to feed crowds on budgets that left nothing for waste. The bones held pockets of succulent meat that required gnawing and sucking to fully enjoy. Juke joint cooks started these pots early, letting them bubble while preparing for evening crowds. Neck bones cost almost nothing at the butcher because most customers didn't want them. But Black cooks knew time and patience could transform cheap ingredients into something extraordinary.
If childhood had a smell for many kids in the 1960s, it was fried bologna. That familiar sizzle of meat hitting the skillet was the sign that lunch was handled, even if the fridge looked empty. Black mothers could turn a 50-cent pack of bologna into pure joy. The edges would curl into little cups as the fat rendered down, giving that perfect crisp that made it taste better than steak. A slice of white bread, a smear of mustard or mayonnaise, maybe a tomato if you were lucky. That was it. And somehow, that simple sandwich filled bellies and hearts alike. Mothers called it a quick fix, but for kids, it was comfort food in its truest form. It was eaten standing up, sitting on porches, or running out the door to play, and every bite felt like love on a budget. Bologna was cheap, but what came from it was priceless. A moment of flavor, family, and fun that outlasted the hunger it cured. In times when money was short, flavor never was.
Number 25, fried cornmeal mush with cane syrup. For most black families in 1960, the morning started with a pot of yesterday's mush sliced into squares. The rule was simple. Cook a heavy pot of cornmeal on Sunday night, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the icebox until it was firm enough to slice. By Monday morning, a quarter-inch slab hit the hot grease and crisped up dark brown on both sides. A spoon of cane syrup or molasses went over the top, and that was breakfast for a working man or a school child. Cornmeal sold for about 18 cents for a 5-pound sack in 1960, which meant a family could eat from that one bag for almost 2 weeks. Nothing got thrown away. The crumbs that fell off the cutting board went into the chicken bucket on the back porch. At just 15 cents a pound in 1960s grocery stores, neck bones let families serve what felt like luxury while spending almost nothing. Smothered turkey wings offered holiday turkey flavor to families who could not afford whole birds, proving that black mothers could transform any cut into celebration food. These meaty wings were seasoned generously, dredged in flour, and fried until golden before being smothered in rich onion gravy and slow cooked until the meat threatened to fall from the bone. The frying created a crust that held up under the gravy, while the long, slow braise rendered the tough connective tissue into gelatin that made each bite silky. Children loved these wings because they could pick them up and eat with their hands, an indulgence rarely permitted at formal holiday tables. 4 or 5 wings could feed an entire family when paired with rice to catch every drop of gravy. At a fraction of the cost of a whole turkey, wings made holiday tables complete even when money was tight. The gravy alone, rich with pan drippings and onion sweetness, became a dish in its own right that children poured over everything on their plates. Red rice with smoked sausage was the kind of dish that announced itself the moment you walked through the door, its tomato-rich aroma filling every corner of the kitchen. African-American mothers learned this recipe from gulagishi traditions, where rice was king and nothing went to waste. Long grain rice was sautéed with onions, bell peppers, and garlic, then simmered in crushed tomatoes seasoned with paprika and cayenne. Sliced smoked sausage was stirred in during the final minutes, its rendered fat adding richness to every grain. The dish was economical and filling, stretching a single link of sausage across a pot that fed 6 children. Served straight from the cast iron skillet, this rice carried the warmth of Sunday afternoons. Children scraped their bowls clean, hoping for seconds before siblings could claim them. Neck bone soup transformed one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher into a deeply flavorful meal that children fought over. Black mothers browned the pork neck bones first, building a foundation of savory depth before adding water, vegetables, and seasonings. The bones simmered for hours, releasing collagen that gave the broth a silky body, while meat became fork tender. Potatoes, carrots, onions, and sometimes cabbage joined the pot, creating a complete meal in one dish. The aroma announced to the neighborhood that something special was cooking. Children learned to pick every bit of tender meat while savoring the rich broth that clung to each piece. This soup proved that skilled hands could transform the humblest ingredients into something children would remember forever.
Brown sugar ham glaze was the kind of Christmas magic children could smell from the porch before they even stepped inside. A scent so sweet and warm it felt like the holiday had finally arrived. Mothers made the glaze from pantry ingredients they trusted, stirring brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and a little mustard until it bubbled into a thick, glossy syrup. When it coated the ham, it melted into every crease and crack, turning the surface sticky and caramel-colored. Children hovered nearby, pretending to help, but really waiting for the chance to sneak a fingertip across the edge of the pan when no one was looking. The glaze tasted like deep sweetness mixed with spice, a flavor that lived somewhere between candy and tradition. Even families who could not afford a big ham sometimes bought a single slice just so they could have the glaze, because the glaze alone felt like a whole celebration. It was the part of Christmas dinner children talked about the most, the flavor they waited 12 long months for, and the one they compared every other holiday dish to. In many homes, the glaze was made the exact same way every year, passed down quietly through memory, not written recipes. Brown sugar ham glaze tasted like warmth, celebration, and the promise that Christmas had truly begun. Collard greens with ham hocks was the smell of Sunday and the sound of family. The greens started tough, but once they simmered down with smoked meat and onions, they turned soft, flavorful, and rich. The ham hock gave that deep, savory base that stretched into the broth, what everyone called pot liquor. Mothers made big pots of it because nobody could stop at one serving. The meal was simple but carried tradition, passed from hands that had worked the land and learned how to make flavor from scraps. A plate of greens next to cornbread and rice could feed you body and soul. The bitterness of the greens mixed with the salt of the meat in perfect harmony, and that first bite was always worth the wait. In the 1960s, this wasn't just dinner. It was history simmered to perfection. Sweet potato pie was the crown of the Christmas table, the dessert children begged for long before dinner was even served. Mothers boiled the sweet potatoes until they softened, then mashed them with butter, evaporated milk, sugar, eggs, and warm spices that filled the house with the smell of holidays. The filling turned silky and golden as they poured it into handmade crusts, rolled thin and pressed into the pie dish with practiced fingers. While the pies baked, the entire kitchen transformed, the air turning thick with cinnamon and nutmeg, making children circle the oven like hungry little satellites. When the pies finally emerged, the tops had a gentle sheen, and the centers jiggled just enough to promise the perfect texture. Children always begged for a slice before dinner, and mothers always said no with a smile because part of the joy was waiting. The flavor was warm, creamy, familiar, and impossibly comforting. The kind of sweetness that felt like it came from the soul, not just the kitchen. Sweet potato pie tasted like tradition, pride, and the pure excitement of Christmas in a single bite.
Potato soup was the rescue meal Black mothers made when there seemed to be nothing else in the house. A bag of potatoes, some onions, milk if available, and basic seasonings came together into a creamy bowl that filled bellies and warmed hearts. The potatoes were peeled, cubed, and simmered until soft enough to mash slightly, creating that thick texture children loved. Some mothers added celery for color, while others stirred in cheese when available. A little butter floating on top made every spoonful feel special, despite the soup's humble origins. Children never knew this was budget cooking because it tasted like love and comfort in every bite. Potato soup fed families through lean times without ever feeling like sacrifice. The simplicity was the genius of it all. Dirty rice earned its name from the ground meat and chicken livers that gave it a speckled, earthy appearance no child could resist. Mothers would brown ground beef or pork with finely chopped livers, onions, celery, and bell peppers until the mixture was deeply savory. Rice was cooked separately, then folded into the meat mixture with Cajun seasonings that brought gentle heat and bold flavor. The dish stretched a small amount of meat across a large pot, making it economical enough for weekly suppers. Children who claimed to hate liver never suspected it was hidden in every delicious bite, and mothers kept that secret with knowing smiles. Dirty rice was Cajun tradition, adopted and adapted by Black families throughout Louisiana and beyond. It proved that the best flavors often came from the humblest ingredients. Egg custard pie required so little that its simplicity was the whole point. 6 ingredients, a single mixing bowl, and a grandmother who knew the oven by feel rather than numbers. Eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, a pinch of nutmeg, and a pie crust. That was everything. The custard went in liquid and came out set, silky, golden on top where the nutmeg dusted the surface like freckles. The origins ran back through centuries of European baking adapted in Southern Black kitchens where eggs and milk were cheap and always on hand. This was the pie you made when budget wouldn't stretch for fruit or pecans or chocolate, and somehow it satisfied deeper than all of them. Big Mama's version was the standard in most households. She didn't measure the nutmeg. She shook the tin over the filling until it looked right, and it always looked right. You could follow her recipe to the letter today, but without her hand on that tin, the top would never look the same. Parched. Peanuts required nothing but raw peanuts, a cast iron skillet, and patience, which is why every grandmother made them differently. Some roasted them in the shell, shaking the pan every few minutes until the shells darkened and the kitchen filled with a warm, earthy scent that clung to the curtains. Others shelled them first, stirring the raw nuts dry with a pinch of salt until they turned golden and the oil released. The technique traces to West Africa, where groundnuts were roasted over open fire long before reaching the American South through the slave trade. By the 1950s, parched peanuts were common in Black households across Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas, where peanut farming shaped local economies for generations. George Washington, Carver's work at Tuskegee had elevated the peanut from livestock feed to kitchen staple decades earlier. You ate them warm, handful by handful, and the ones at the bottom of the bowl, the most roasted, the darkest, those were always the best. She never called it a recipe. Number 23, hot water cornbread for breakfast. When the flour ran out before payday, a quick patty of hot water cornbread filled the gap, and almost every soul food kitchen leaned on this trick. The method had only 3 things in it: cornmeal, a little salt, and boiling water poured straight from the kettle. The mix went stiff in the bowl, then a wet hand patted it into rounds the size of a saucer, and those rounds dropped into a 1/4 inch of hot lard. 3 minutes aside and breakfast was on the table. Working women in Detroit and Cleveland kept a coffee can of cornmeal next to the stove for exactly this reason. It cost almost nothing, it filled up a grown man, and it took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. The patties were often eaten torn open with a spoonful of pot liquor, saved from the night before. Peanut butter and jelly on saltine crackers was what happened when the bread ran out, but hunger didn't. You spread peanut butter on one cracker, grape jelly on the other, pressed them together, and hoped it held. It rarely did. The saltine snapped under the weight, and you'd eat the whole thing in pieces, licking your fingers between bites. But the salt cut through the sweet jelly in a way soft bread never managed. In the 1960s, a box of saltines cost 15 cents and peanut butter ran about a quarter, making this one of the cheapest protein snacks a mother could stock. Kids ate these after school, before dinner, and sometimes instead of dinner when weeks ran long. Crackers stayed crisp for weeks. Peanut butter didn't need the icebox, and the jelly lasted until the jar was scraped clean with a spoon. Long before snacks came in plastic wrappers, they came from the same pot that fed the family. You could hear peanut brittle being made before you saw it. The low rumble of sugar boiling in a heavy saucepan, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom in slow circles, and then the sharp hiss when baking soda hit the molten candy and the whole pot foamed up like a science experiment. The recipe called for sugar, corn syrup, water, raw peanuts, butter, vanilla, and a teaspoon of baking soda added at the very end, which was the moment that separated the women who could make brittle from the ones who burned it every time. The candy had to reach 300 degrees exactly, and in kitchens where the only thermometer was a candy thermometer from the 1940s with a cracked glass tube. The old women tested it by dropping a thread of syrup into cold water and listening to the snap. Poured onto a buttered slab or a greased cookie sheet, stretched thin with a fork while still molten, then left to cool and crack into golden shards. You couldn't make it on a rainy day. The sugar pulled moisture from the air and went soft. Rice and kidney beans was a hearty one-pot meal that filled bellies and stretched budgets further than seemed possible. Dried kidney beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until they became creamy and rich. Rice was served alongside or stirred directly into the beans, creating a complete protein that nutritionists would later praise, but mothers already understood. The dish was seasoned with cayenne and thyme, giving it warmth that radiated from the inside out. Children would eat multiple bowls, not realizing they were consuming one of the healthiest and most economical meals their mothers could provide. Louisiana traditions heavily influenced this dish, but it appeared in Black kitchens across the entire South. Rice and kidney beans proved that poverty could never diminish flavor or love. Butterbean soup carried a creamy richness that made children forget they were eating something simple. Black mothers simmered dried butter beans with ham hocks or bacon ends, letting the fat render into the broth while beans softened into velvety perfection. Onions, garlic, and a bay leaf added depth, while cayenne brought gentle warmth to every spoonful. The beans broke down just enough to thicken the soup naturally. Mothers often mashed some against the pot's side to create that silky texture children loved. This soup was filling enough to serve as a complete meal, keeping growing children satisfied through long afternoons. It represented the quiet genius of Southern cooking, where patience and humble ingredients created something that tasted far more luxurious than its cost would suggest. Pork chops and sauerkraut reflected the blending of cultures in American neighborhoods where Black and German families lived side by side. Browned pork chops were layered with drained sauerkraut in Dutch ovens, then covered and simmered until the meat became fork tender. The tangy sourness of fermented cabbage cut through the richness of pork, creating balance that made each bite interesting. Some mothers added caraway seeds, brown sugar, or sliced apples to customize flavor. The dish was economical because sauerkraut cost pennies and added volume to stretch meat further. Children who were skeptical at first often became devoted fans once they tasted how tanginess complemented savory pork. Served with boiled potatoes or bread for soaking up juices, this dinner filled bellies and warmed spirits on cold evenings. 4 ingredients in 5 minutes, that was all it took to make Kool-Aid pie, and that was exactly why every kid on the block knew its taste by heart. 1 packet of Kool-Aid powder, any flavor, stirred into a can of sweetened condensed milk until the color turned electric. Then a tub of Cool Whip folded in gently, the whole thing poured into a store-bought graham cracker crust and slid into the freezer. No oven, no thermometer, no skill required beyond stirring and waiting. Cherry turned the filling neon red. Grape made it purple enough to stain your teeth. Lemon lime gave it a color that didn't exist in nature. The pie came out firm enough to slice, but soft enough to melt on your tongue. Sweet and tangy and cold in a way that felt like summer crystallized on a plate. It cost less than $1 to make in 1967, and it fed a whole family with enough left over for the kids who showed up at the back door asking what was for dessert. Fried corn started with a sharp knife and an ear fresh from the garden. You held it upright on the cutting board and sliced downward, letting kernels fall, then scraped the cob with the back of the knife to release the milky starch that made everything come together. That starch thickened the corn as it hit the bacon grease, turning loose kernels into a creamy golden dish that tasted nothing like anything from a can. Salt, pepper, maybe a pinch of sugar if the corn wasn't sweet enough on its own. Through the 1950s and 60s, when gardens behind shotgun houses overflowed with Silver Queen and Country Gentleman varieties, fried corn showed up daily from July through September. Kids ate it warm from the skillet, spooned onto bread, or straight from the pan, barefoot in kitchens where the window stayed open because there was no other way to breathe. The woman who made it best in your house never said what she added. After she stopped cooking, the corn never tasted that way again. But not every snack came from the stove. Some came from standing around the kitchen table with greased hands. Number 19, smothered onions on toast. When there was no meat at all, a skillet of slow smothered onions over day-old bread was breakfast. 2 large yellow onions went into the pan with a spoon of saved drippings, and the heat stayed low for almost 20 minutes. The onions cooked down to a soft brown jam that smelled like supper instead of sacrifice. 2 slices of bread, toasted dry in the oven, got covered with the warm onions and eaten with a fork. It was the kind of breakfast nobody bragged about, but it kept the body going on a morning when the icebox was almost empty.
Candied yams were the sweetest thing to ever come out of a humble kitchen. Peeled, sliced, and baked with butter, sugar, and just a hint of cinnamon, they turned into a caramel-colored dream. On Sundays or holidays, you could bet the smell alone had kids running to the table. Black mothers knew how to make them shine, rich enough to feel like dessert, but served proudly beside collard greens or fried chicken. They didn't need marshmallows or fancy toppings, just patience and love. The syrup would bubble, the edges would crisp, and by the time the pan came out, it looked like gold. Even families who had little found a way to make this dish because sweetness was a necessity, not a luxury. Candied yams reminded everyone that joy could still be baked right alongside struggle. Pineapple glazed ham slices were a festive touch. Black families used to make Christmas feel luxurious even when the budget was slim. A single ham slice could feed several children when dressed with pineapple rounds cooked in brown sugar and pan drippings, stretching what little meat the family had. The fruit caramelized on top, turning golden and glossy as its juices melted into the salty ham below. Children loved the mix of sweet and salty, the syrup dripping down the edges of the ham like liquid gold, making every plate look special. Some mothers even saved the pineapple juice from the can to make sure nothing went to waste. Pineapple glaze turned a simple slice of meat into something that looked like it belonged on a holiday magazine cover, even though it came from thrift and creativity. It tasted like celebration made from care, resourcefulness, and the determination to make Christmas feel full no matter what the pantry looked like.
Ham bone soup was the ultimate Sunday leftover miracle that Black mothers perfected during the 1960s. After Saturday's ham had been carved down to scraps, that bone went straight into a big pot with water, dried beans, onions, and celery. The bone released its marrow and smoky essence over hours of slow simmering, transforming plain water into liquid gold. Children hovered near the stove, breathing in the rich aroma that promised comfort and warmth. Mothers knew exactly when the meat started falling off, signaling dinner was close. The soup stretched one ham into meals that fed a family for days. Served with cornbread for dipping, this soup taught children that the best flavors came from what others might have thrown away. It was resourcefulness transformed into something deeply delicious. Tomato rice carried the bright tang of canned tomatoes mixed into fluffy grains, a dish that children either loved immediately or grew to crave. Mothers would saute onions in bacon grease until soft, then add canned tomatoes and let them break down into a fragrant sauce. Rice was stirred in and cooked slowly, absorbing every drop of that tangy, sweet liquid until each grain turned a beautiful sunset orange. Some families added sugar to balance acidity, while others preferred natural sharpness that cut through heavier dishes. It was often served alongside fried fish or pork chops, but children happily ate bowls of it alone. Tomato rice was inexpensive, using pantry staples that cost pennies but delivered comfort worth far more. This dish taught children that simple ingredients created memorable meals. The secret ingredient in chocolate mayonnaise cake was the secret itself. Nobody told you what was in it until the pan was empty and the compliments had already landed. Mayonnaise replaced both eggs and oil, and it worked because mayonnaise was already eggs and oil, just emulsify. Hellmann's printed the recipe on jars starting in the 1950s, and by the early 60s, it had slipped into black kitchens across the South and up through the Great Migration cities. The cake came out impossibly moist, darker than regular chocolate cake, with a crumb so tender it almost fell apart on the fork. Cocoa powder, flour, sugar, baking soda, water, vanilla, and a full cup of mayonnaise stirred right in. No cream and butter, no separating eggs. The finished cake got dusted with powdered sugar or frosted with a simple chocolate glaze, and people ate it without ever guessing. When someone finally told them, the reaction was always the same. Silence, then laughter, then a second slice. Soft white bread, a thick spread of butter, and a generous shake of sugar pressed into the surface so it wouldn't fall off. That first bite was pure sweetness cut by the salt in the butter, the bread compressing under your teeth into something almost like cake. Across the 1950s and 60s, this was what mothers made when kids came in starving and dinner was still an hour away. No cooking, no planning, nothing that wasn't already on the counter. Some mothers sprinkled lightly, others buried the bread under a snowdrift of crystals that crunched with each bite. It was never served at gatherings, never mentioned proudly, but ask any black adult from that era and watch their face change. The memory isn't about the food, it's about hands moving fast between the counter and the table, making sure you had something sweet before the world asked anything else of you. Sock It to Me cake showed up on kitchen counters everywhere after Duncan Hines printed the recipe on their butter cake mix in the late 1960s. The name came from Aretha Franklin's Respect and the laugh-in catchphrase that followed, but in black households, it became something more personal than pop culture. You took that boxed mix, added sour cream, eggs, and oil, then swirled a ribbon of cinnamon, brown sugar, and chopped pecans through the center before pouring the batter into a greased bundt pan. After baking, a thin vanilla glaze went over the top while the cake was still warm. The glaze pooled into every ridge of the bundt shape and hardened into a crackly sweetness that kids picked at before anyone cut a proper slice. It showed up at church picnics, Saturday visits, and repasts after funerals, always carried in covered with aluminum foil. Your aunt made the best one. She swore it was the extra egg. After she passed, everyone tried her version. Nobody got it right. Divinity candy represented the precarious magic of Christmas candy making, a fluffy white confection that could fail spectacularly if humidity crept too high or temperatures dropped wrong. African American mothers learned to read the weather before attempting divinity, choosing crisp, clear days when sugar syrup would behave properly. The process required pouring hot sugar syrup in thin streams into beaten egg whites, transforming the mixture into clouds of sweetness that held shape when dropped onto waxed paper. Pecans or walnuts studded each piece, adding crunch to the ethereal candy. Children watched the transformation with wonder, seeing how patience and skill could create something that looked like edible snow. Divinity was packed into tins and given as gifts, proof of a mother's dedication and expertise. The candy didn't keep long, which made it special, a Christmas-only treat that couldn't be replicated during humid summer months. Failed batches were never wasted, but spread on toast, teaching that even mistakes could nourish.
7-Up cake was the bright citrus-soaked reunion classic that brought a cheerful spark to every dessert table thanks to its airy texture and lemon-lime sweetness. The batter mixed into a pale, silky pour that gained its lift from the soda folded carefully inside a trick that made the cake light, tender, and bursting with flavor. As it baked, the kitchen filled with a fresh citrus scent that felt like summer even on cloudy days, and children hovered near the oven, hoping the timer would ring early. When the cake cooled, it revealed soft golden curves shaped by the bundt pan, making it one of the most eye-catching desserts at any family gathering. A warm sugar glaze was poured over the top, soaking into every ridge and giving each bite a sweet, bright finish. Families looked for it at every reunion because it tasted like celebration without costing much to make. Each slice carried the memory of afternoons spent laughing outdoors and long tables full of food that brought people together year after year.
Smothered pork chops with onion gravy was the Sunday dinner that brought entire families rushing to the table before the blessing was finished. Black mothers seasoned bone and chops with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged them in flour, and browned them golden in cast iron. The magic came when sliced onions were added to the drippings and cooked until soft and sweet. Broth was poured in to create thick, savory gravy that bubbled as the chops simmered beneath it. The meat became so tender, it fell off the bone, soaking up every drop of that silky sauce. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, this dish stretched one package of pork chops into a feast that fed 6 with seconds to spare. Children would sop up the last of the gravy with bread, unwilling to let a single drop go to waste. Chicken foot soup represented the ultimate expression of waste-nothing cooking that Black mothers practiced with pride. Chicken feet, which cost almost nothing at the butcher, were cleaned thoroughly and simmered for hours until they released their natural gelatin into the broth. The result was a rich, silky soup that supported vegetables, noodles, or rice beautifully. Children might have been skeptical at first, but one taste of the deeply flavorful broth converted even the pickiest eaters. The collagen made the soup almost medicinal, perfect for cold weather and sore throats. Mothers understood that these overlooked parts carried tremendous flavor potential when treated with patience and skill. The feet were removed before serving, leaving only incredible broth. This soup taught children that value existed in unexpected places. Hoppin' John rice was more than food in African American households. It was tradition, luck, and heritage served in a single pot. Black-eyed peas simmered with ham hocks or bacon until tender, their cooking liquid becoming a rich, smoky broth. Rice was added directly to the pot, absorbing those flavors as it cooked until each grain was infused with the essence of pork and pepper. Mothers made this dish on New Year's Day for prosperity, but children begged for it year-round because the taste was simply irresistible. The peas were believed to represent coins, bringing fortune to those who ate them, but the real treasure was the flavor itself. Served with cornbread on the side, this was a complete meal that cost almost nothing to prepare. Hoppin' John connected generations, carrying recipes passed down through oral tradition. Wacky cake needed no eggs, no milk, no butter, just flour, sugar, cocoa, salt, baking soda, vegetable oil, vinegar, vanilla, and water. That was the recipe, born during wartime rationing when dairy and eggs were scarce, and it survived decades past the war because it was cheap, fast, and foolproof. You didn't even need a mixing bowl. The dry ingredients went straight into the baking pan, a 9 by 13 or an 8-inch square, and 3 wheels were pressed into the surface with the back of a spoon, oil in one, vinegar in another, vanilla in the third. Water poured over everything, stirred right there in the pan with a fork until the batter went smooth. The vinegar and baking soda reacted to give it lift, and the oil kept it moist without butter. It came out dark, tender, and honest, not as rich as a traditional chocolate cake, but satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with ingredients and everything to do with the fact that your mother made it from nothing, and nothing never tasted that good by accident. Syrup sandwiches filled the gap between hunger and the next real meal. 2 slices of white bread, a heavy pour of Cairo syrup or dark cane syrup, pressed together and wrapped in wax paper for school. The bread went soft and sticky within minutes, part of the appeal for little hands that liked pulling it apart in sweet, doughy strings. In the 1950s, a bottle of Cairo cost less than 20 cents and stretched across a week of snacks for 3 or 4 kids. Dark syrup carried a caramel note with a faint bitterness that balanced the sweetness. Light was milder, preferred by the younger ones. No one bragged about eating syrup sandwiches. It was the kind of snack made quietly on afternoons when the icebox held nothing else. But decades later, grown men and women speak of it with something close to reverence because that sandwich meant somebody made sure you didn't go without. Japanese fruitcake held a mystifying name that had nothing to do with Japan and everything to do with Southern Black Christmas tradition. This layered spice cake, alternated with coconut filling, became the centerpiece that grandmothers started preparing weeks before the holiday arrived. The layers were dense with raisins, nuts, and warm spices, cinnamon, allspice, and cloves that perfumed kitchens for days. Between each layer went a cooked filling of fresh coconut, sugar, and citrus that set into something almost candy-like. Families debated whether the name came from the exotic coconut or simply from wanting the cake to sound fancy. What mattered more was the ritual: children grating coconuts by hand, mothers stirring filling on the stove, grandmothers supervising every step. The cake improved as it aged, wrapped in cloth and stored in cool pantries where flavors melded into something transcendent. By Christmas morning, each slice revealed beautiful layers that tasted like heritage itself. Pork chop and potato casserole was comfort food architecture, built layer by layer with simple ingredients that transformed into something extraordinary. Raw potato slices were arranged in greased baking dishes, seasoned, then topped with onions and pork chops. Cream of celery soup mixed with milk was poured over everything, creating sauce that bubbled and thickened as it baked. The potatoes cooked slowly in creamy liquid, becoming soft and infused with pork flavor, while the chops roasted until edges crisped. Families gathered as casseroles emerged from ovens, surfaces golden and bubbling with promise. Each serving contained perfectly cooked pork, tender potatoes, and rich sauce, tying everything together. This was the kind of meal that stretched 4 pork chops into dinner for 8, with potatoes making every portion feel generous. Cinnamon sugar toast was the first snack most Black kids learned to make alone, standing on a chair to reach the counter. The bread had to be white and soft enough to hold the butter without tearing. You spread it thick all the way to the edges because bare corners were unacceptable. Then came the cinnamon and sugar from a jar that lived next to the stove, the ratio known only to whoever filled it. The toast went under the broiler, never in a toaster, and you watched through the oven door until the sugar bubbled and the edges turned dark gold. You ate it standing up, burning your fingers, licking the grit off your thumb. It cost pennies, took 3 minutes, and the smell alone could pull every kid in the house out of hiding. Nobody sells it, nobody orders it, but that smell takes you straight back to a kitchen where the oven was always warm.
Butter rolls baked in sweet syrup were the hidden treasure of Southern Christmas tables, a dish that blurred the line between dessert and bread. Mothers rolled the dough into soft spirals, placed them in a pan, and poured a warm mix of milk butter and sugar over the top, letting it settle into every gap. As they baked, the syrup thickened into something creamy sweet and almost custard-like, coating every corner. Children hovered near the oven, unable to wait, their eyes following the bubbling edges. When the rolls came out piping hot, they tore apart in soft, tender layers that melted on the tongue. Butter rolls tasted like sweetness, softness, and pure Christmas comfort. The kind of treat made with hands that understood how to turn simple ingredients into unforgettable joy.
Coconut snowball cookies appeared on Black Christmas cookie platters like edible decorations. Round butter cookies rolled in snowy white coconut that left sweet traces on children's fingers. The dough came together quickly. Butter, sugar, flour, and vanilla, but the rolling technique required practice to achieve perfectly round balls that wouldn't flatten during baking. Fresh from the oven, while still warm, the cookies were rolled in sweetened coconut that clung to their surfaces like fresh fallen snow. Some mothers added finely chopped pecans to the dough for texture, while others kept the recipe pure and simple. The cookies traveled well, packed into tins that went to church gatherings, neighbor visits, and family reunions throughout the holiday season. Children counted how many snowballs remained in the cookie jar, negotiating with siblings for a fair share. The simplicity meant even young daughters could help, learning kitchen skills while creating memories that would outlast any single Christmas.
Hog maw and potatoes was a dish that turned thrift into comfort and labor into flavor. Hog maw, the lining of a pig's stomach, was scrubbed clean, seasoned, and stuffed with diced potatoes, onions, and spices before being boiled to tenderness. The scent filled the house with something hearty and homegrown, proof that nothing from the hog ever went to waste. Families who made it knew that the best meals didn't come from the finest cuts. They came from resourceful hands. The flavor was rich, earthy, and satisfying, a balance between the soft potatoes and the chewy, savory casing. It was the kind of food that stuck with you, not just in the belly, but in memory. Hog maw and potatoes was about resilience, about stretching what little you had into something that felt whole. It was shared at big tables after church, on holidays, or any day that called for gratitude. To outsiders, it might have seemed humble, but for those who grew up on it, it tasted like home and history wrapped in one. A meal like this didn't just feed the body, it fed the pride of making plenty out of almost nothing.
Before we go on, for anyone who wants recipes like these and the others this channel has covered, all gathered in one place, they're in a book called Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen over at my website, thehungryhistorian.com. That is the only time it comes up in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now back to the list. Number 23, cucumber and onion salad. This was the dish that showed up cold on the table when the kitchen was too hot to stand in. Thin sliced cucumbers and white onions sat in a bowl of white vinegar, water, sugar, and salt, chilled until the rings went translucent. Some families added hot sauce, others floated tomato slices on top. The recipe required no heat, no oven, and no standing over a stove, which made it the default side on the worst days of August. A cucumber from the garden, an onion from the pantry, vinegar from the shelf. The bowl sat on the table all day, passed from hand to hand as people came through the kitchen, and nobody complained about leftovers. It got better the longer it sat. By evening, the cucumbers had gone almost translucent, soaked through with vinegar and sweetness. Number 13, hog jowl with black coffee. A single thin slice of smoked hog jowl with a cup of strong black coffee was the breakfast of men who had to be at the mill or the field by sunrise. The jowl came from the cheek of the pig and cost almost nothing because most white grocery stores did not want it. In a soul food household, it was treasured. One slice in a hot pan rendered into smoky brown grease and curled up crisp at the edges. The coffee, boiled in a battered enamel pot and poured strong enough to stand a spoon in, washed it down. There was no toast, no eggs, no fuss. Just meat, fat, and heat in the belly with the smell of wood smoke still in the cured pork. Black families in the Carolinas and Tennessee mountain country ate this 6 days a week through the winter, and grandmothers swore it was what kept the men working past sundown without sitting down once. Somewhere in the Mississippi Delta, probably in the late 1960s, somebody dropped a dill pickle into a jar of Kool-Aid and invented something no cookbook would ever claim. Koolickles were made by draining half the brine from a pickle jar, pouring in a packet of Kool-Aid mixed with a cup of sugar, sealing it, and letting it sit for a week. The pickles turned electric red or deep purple, absorbing sweetness while keeping their sour crunch. Sweet, salty, and tart together. It made no sense until it hit your tongue. They were sold at corner stores and school fundraisers across the Delta, fished from jars with tongs. Cherry and tropical punch were favorites, though grape had its loyalists. A quarter bought you one, and it delivered more flavor per bite than anything else behind that counter. It was backroad brilliance, born from boredom and fearless experimentation by people who never worried about what food was supposed to be. Number 25, tomato sandwich. The simplest summer dish in the Black South started with the tomato still warm from the vine. A thick slice of white bread, a smear of mayonnaise, a tomato cut heavy enough to bend the bread, and a hard shake of salt. That was the whole recipe. In the 1960s, a garden tomato cost nothing. Families in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia grew them by the bushel along fence lines and beside the porch steps. Children ate them like apples, straight off the vine with salt in their pockets. The supermarket tomato that replaced it was bred for shipping durability and picked green. It looked the same. It tasted like cardboard. Anyone who has eaten both knows the difference without needing a laboratory to confirm it. Number 14, scrambled eggs stretched with flour. When a dozen eggs cost 57 cents and a household had 6 mouths to feed, you stretch the eggs with flour and nobody complained. 2 eggs got beaten in a bowl with a heaping tablespoon of flour and a splash of water until smooth. That mixture poured into a hot grease pan made enough fluffy curds to feed 3 children. The flour added body, the eggs added flavor, and the pan came out almost as full as if 4 eggs had gone in. Working mothers across the urban South used this trick on Wednesdays and Thursdays when payday was still 2 mornings away. Older folks today remember it as a perfectly normal breakfast and never once thought of it as cutting corners. It was simply how breakfast got made. What we now romanticize as soul food started right here at the kitchen counter with a tablespoon of flour stretching what our mothers had into what the household needed.
Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish.
Number 17, hoe cakes cooked on the stove lid. The oldest breakfast in the soul food canon was a flat round of cornmeal cooked right on the hot iron, and it was still on tables in 1965. A cup of stone ground cornmeal, a little salt, and boiling water were the only ingredients. The dough patted out flat between two palms, then went straight onto a greased lid or the back of a heavy iron griddle. 3 or 4 minutes aside and the edges were crisp, the middle still tender. Working families ate them split with a smear of lard and a drizzle of cane syrup, and field hands carried the extras wrapped in a piece of newspaper to eat at mid-morning break. Hoe cakes trace back centuries in Black cooking, and almost every grandmother in the rural South still made them at least once a week. Number 22, smoked neck bones and green beans. A pot of green beans in a Black kitchen in the 1960s was never just green beans. It started with smoked neck bones dropped into water and simmered until the meat pulled from the bone, filling the kitchen with the kind of smell that carried to the front porch. The green beans went in after the broth turned dark with pork fat. They cooked low and slow for 2 hours until the beans were soft enough to fall apart. Summer was peak season because the beans came straight from the garden, snapped by hand on the porch while children played in the yard. A bowl of those beans was a full meal with cornbread. People who never grew up on them called them overcooked. The families who ate them never asked for a second opinion. Watermelon rind pickles were a testament to the waste-nothing philosophy that defined African American cooking. After the sweet red flesh was eaten during hot reunion afternoons, the white and green rinds were saved and transformed into sweet, tangy pickles. Women soaked the rinds overnight in salt water to firm them, then simmered them in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until translucent. The process took patience but cost nothing, since the rinds were kitchen scraps given new life. These pickles provided welcome contrast to heavy reunion foods, their sweet acidity cutting through plates of meat and gravy. Children often wrinkled their noses at first, but grew to love the unexpected sweetness hiding in those pale slices. Watermelon rind pickles represented the genius of turning would-be garbage into treasured food.
Cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food, it was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but soothing. Even now, its scent carries the same promise, that comfort comes from what you give, not what you have.
Number 16, mush and molasses. The cheapest thing a sharecropper's wife could put on a plate in 1962 was a bowl of hot cornmeal mush with a spoon of dark molasses cut through the middle. The math told the whole story. Cornmeal at 18 cents for 5 pounds, molasses at 50 cents a quart, and 1 pot of water from the well. That bowl of breakfast worked out to less than 2 cents per serving, and it filled up a grown man until dinner. The mush got stirred slow for 15 minutes so it stayed smooth, then poured into a wide bowl while still steaming. The molasses sank down to the bottom in dark ribbons, and the spoon caught a little of both with every bite. Tenant farming families across Arkansas and Mississippi ate this 6 mornings a week for most of the decade. It was the food of people who counted every coin, but the warmth of it kept whole households going through the coldest months of the year. Number 24, fried okra. Okra hit its peak in July and August, and black families fried it the same way their great-grandmothers had since before the Civil War. The pods were sliced thin, rolled in cornmeal, seasoned with salt and pepper, and dropped into a cast iron skillet with enough lard or bacon grease to come halfway up the sides. The trick was oil temperature. Too cool and the cornmeal turned soggy. Too hot and the outside burned before the inside cooked through. A grandmother who had done it for 40 years never needed a thermometer. She flicked a pinch of cornmeal into the grease and listened. Okra came to North America through the slave trade carried from West Africa. By the 1960s, it grew in nearly every black garden south of the Mason-Dixon line, and frying it was as natural as breathing. Homemade peanut brittle started with a heavy saucepan, raw peanuts, white sugar, and the kind of focus that didn't allow for conversation. Sugar went into the pot with corn syrup and water, heated until it hit what cookbooks call the hard crack stage, a term she never used because she judged it by color and by how the syrup behaved when dripped into cold water. Too early and the brittle stayed chewy. Too late and it burned bitter. When the syrup turned amber, in went the peanuts, a pat of butter, and a pinch of baking soda that made the whole mixture foam and rise. Poured fast onto a greased cookie sheet and spread thin before it set. The brittle cooled into golden sheets that shattered when cracked against the counter. Through the 1940s and 50s, this was Christmas candy in black homes, wrapped in wax paper, packed in tins, given to neighbors and church members as gifts. You can buy a peanut brittle anywhere now. None of it cracks the way hers did. Number 12, liver mush, slices with hot coffee. Liver mush was the cheap North Carolina cousin of scrapple, and in black households across the Piedmont, it carried the cold months from October through to March. The loaf came wrapped in waxy butcher paper for about 30 cents a pound in 1963, less than half the price of any cured pork on the same counter. It was ground pork liver mixed with stone ground cornmeal, dried sage, and plenty of black pepper, then chilled solid in a loaf pan overnight until it cut clean. 2 cold slices hit a dry pan first thing in the morning and crisped up dark brown on both sides in under 5 minutes, no extra grease needed. A thick slice on a piece of light bread with a smear of yellow mustard fed a grown man straight through to his lunch break, and the mug of strong black coffee beside it finished the meal off.
Molasses coffee was not fancy, but it was strong enough to keep a person going through the longest of days. When coffee beans were scarce and sugar even scarcer, someone clever discovered that a spoonful of blackstrap molasses stirred into hot water or weak brew could make a drink both sweet and smoky. The result was thick and dark, with a bitterness that clung to the tongue and warmed the chest. It tasted like work and resilience, like fields at sunrise and factory bells ringing. Families drank it early and often, some adding milk if fortune allowed, others taking it plain with bread crusts for breakfast. It was a poor man's luxury, a small rebellion against hunger and fatigue. The smell alone was enough to wake the tired and remind them that strength could be stirred, not bought. Molasses coffee was courage in a cup, shared by hands cracked from labor and hearts that refused to quit. It carried the spirit of people who built their mornings out of willpower and steam, proving that dignity could live even in the thinnest brew.
Number 18, Streako lean and red-eye gravy. Few breakfasts spoke louder about black Southern survival than a thin slice of Streako lean with a pour of red-eye gravy on top. Streako lean was the cheap cousin of bacon, a piece of side meat with stripes of pink running through the fat. It cost half what bacon cost. In 1965, sometimes only 15 cents a pound at a country store. 2 slices went into a hot pan and curled up tight as they crisped, leaving a thin layer of brown drippings stuck to the bottom. A half cup of strong black coffee poured straight into that hot pan, and the brown bits lifted off the iron in seconds. That dark, salty pour was the red eye gravy. It went over a split biscuit or a wedge of cornbread, and the streak of lean sat right on top. The flavor was bigger than the price, and most older folks today still remember the smell of coffee hitting that pan first thing in the morning. For many of us, that one pour of red eye gravy is the closest thing our grandmothers ever left behind to a written recipe. Pork chops with tomatoes and peppers was a summer dish making use of garden abundance while keeping meals affordable and bright. Fresh tomatoes were sliced thickly while bell peppers were cut into strips, both vegetables seasoned simply. Brown pork chops were arranged in baking dishes and covered with vegetables, which released juices as everything roasted together. The tomatoes broke down into natural sauce that bathed pork in sweet acidity, while peppers added color and sweetness. This tasted like summer itself, fresh and vibrant despite requiring minimal effort. Mothers loved it because vegetables came from backyard gardens or were purchased cheaply at peak season. Children loved how sweet peppers and tangy tomatoes transformed ordinary pork chops into something brighter and more exciting than usual preparations.
Blackberry cobbler was the reunion favorite made from berries that came straight from backyards, fence lines, or summer fields where children stained their fingers purple, gathering enough fruit to fill a pot. The berries cooked down with sugar until they released their deep purple juices, filling the kitchen with a smell that drifted like warm, sweet air across the entire gathering. The crust was dropped in thick spoonfuls or spread across the top, depending on family tradition, and it baked into a golden blanket that cracked open to reveal bubbling fruit beneath. Each scoop held sweet tart berries wrapped in soft dough, and every bowl stained lips and spoons with the color of summer. Blackberry cobbler tasted like hot afternoon's laughter and the pride of bringing something homegrown to the reunion table. It was the dessert that vanished quickly because everyone wanted a taste of the season captured in a single dish.
Tea cakes represented the softest, most beloved cookies in 1960s Black Christmas traditions. Not too sweet, not too fancy, just perfectly tender rounds that melted on the tongue. African-American grandmothers mixed these by hand, creaming butter and sugar until light, adding eggs and vanilla, then folding in flour until the dough came together soft but not sticky. The cookies were rolled thick and cut with drinking glasses or hand-me-down cutters that had seen generations of Christmas baking. Baked just until the edges barely turned golden, they emerged soft enough to bend slightly before breaking. Tea cakes weren't showpieces like layer cakes. They were everyday love made edible, the cookies that appeared in cookie jars throughout December and disappeared just as quickly. Children ate them with cold milk after school, with hot cocoa on Christmas morning, with nothing at all except hunger and gratitude. The recipe required no exotic ingredients, just pantry staples transformed by skill into something that tasted like home. Smothered pork chops were Sunday dinner brought to Saturday night at juke joints across the rural South. Bone-in chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then dredged in flour and fried until golden. The chops were then covered in rich onion gravy made from pan drippings and sliced onions cooked until sweet. Simmered low until the meat turned fork tender, this dish delivered comfort that transcended the smoky juke joint atmosphere. The gravy clung to every bite, demanding rice or bread for sopping. For customers missing their mother's or grandmother's cooking, smothered pork chops transported them back to family tables and Sunday afternoons where love was measured in how long the gravy simmered. Number 15, souse meat on saltine crackers. Souse, also called hog head cheese, was the breakfast meat of working people who could not afford bacon. A hog's head got simmered for hours with vinegar, peppers, and salt. Then the cooked meat was packed tight into a loaf pan and chilled until it sliced like jelly. Two cold slices on a stack of saltine crackers made a breakfast that was salty, tangy, and filling enough for a morning shift. A small loaf cost about 35 cents in a black neighborhood grocery, and it lasted 4 to 5 mornings if the family was careful with the slicing.
Chitlins' holiday feast once marked winter celebrations with an aroma as unforgettable as the labor required to prepare it. Hog intestines were cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours with onions, vinegar, and spices until tender. The dish demanded patience and community, often bringing families together for a full day of washing and cooking. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, chitlins carried the history of using every part of the animal, a practice born of necessity during slavery and carried forward as a mark of resilience. Despite the strong scent that filled kitchens and neighborhoods, the feast represented abundance and pride, especially during Christmas and New Year gatherings. Elders spoke of the old days while younger generations learned the careful methods required to make the dish safe and flavorful. In many places, health concerns and changing tastes have pushed chitlins aside, but the tradition still holds a powerful place in memory as a symbol of perseverance and celebration.
Those were the dishes that didn't cost much, but meant everything. A black mother in the 1960s didn't need a big grocery budget to put love on that table, and these 60 plates are living proof. If your mama or your grandma made something that should have been right here on this list, drop it in the comments, because the ones you share always hit different. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what is coming next. There is a whole lot more where this came from, and we will see you there.